Well, good morning, everyone. This is Dana Parsons with LeadingAge Virginia, and thank you so much for joining our coronavirus weekly call. Today, we are going to be focusing on issues related to whether communities will mandate the COVID-19 vaccine for their employees or not. And so we have invited Peter Guardi today with Whiteford Taylor Preston, who is also a Leading Age Virginia sponsor. So thank you so much for joining us today and for sponsoring Leading Age Virginia. Peter represents public and private employers, both for profit and not for profit, in all aspects of their employment relationship. He successfully represented employers against discrimination and other employee related claims, both on a federal and state level. And he is here today to talk with us about legal issues surrounding mandating the vaccine. So thank you so much for joining us, Peter, and over to you.
Thank you. I'm very glad to speak to all of you on this issue, and I know it's one that people have a lot of questions about. There's many articles on it, so why don't I just sort of dive in to what we have regarding vaccination and vaccination policies in the employment context. The first slide covers essentially the questions you need to start asking yourself before you really say we're going to mandate vaccines or not mandate vaccines. What when you look at this question, first of all, you should ask yourself, what is the business need for the vaccinations? Have you done a risk assessment within your organization? What is the availability of other effective measures for infection control, reasonable accommodations? Do you have a COVID-19 infection control plan? I assume all of you do, and all of you have fairly rigid requirements in place to maintain safety within the organization. And vaccinations should be looked at as a piece of this plan for you to be able to reach a particular goal with respect to safety within your organization, among your residents, and among your employees. A secondary consideration here, no less important, but one you should certainly be, we're going to talk about more, is what are the legal ramifications from a vaccine mandate? Obviously, there are going to be Americans with Disability Act questions, questions with respect to genetic discrimination, religious accommodation questions, and then even for some of you, if you have unions, issues related to collective bargaining. What is your workforce culture? In some cases, you may have a workforce culture that is resistant to vaccinations. You may have subcultures within your workforce, tiers within the classifications of employment, where you may find that employees in one particular group or classification are more willing to be vaccinated than another group, and this may be indicative of the type of work that, or indicated by the type of work that's being performed or not. And it's difficult to make broad generalizations. This is something you're going to have to determine based on your particular workforce. Where are those issues going to arise? Who's going to be reluctant or who has been reluctant? And you may find the answer to that question more quickly through a non-mandated policy for vaccination, one which encourages it rather than a mandate from the start. How are you going to enforce the policy? What are the steps that you're going to take if you have a refusal to take the vaccine, determining the basis for the vaccine and following through the various legal steps that we'll be discussing? Those should be thought out ahead of time, because treating like cases in like manners is very important to avoid discrimination issues as they arise in the workplace. Who's going to administer the plan? Who's going to pay for it? In many cases, if you have a mandatory plan, then the employer is going to be paying for that. Even OSHA guidance has suggested that even in non-mandatory circumstances, the employer should encourage it by paying for those who would volunteer to take the vaccination. How are you going to get the vaccines to the site? And particularly now, when there's a limited supply of vaccine, Uh, how are you going to get the quantity that you need? And how can you enforce a mandate when those vaccines are not readily available? And a final question you should ask is what types of privacy protocols are going to be implemented? Because invariably in the context of a vaccine are going to be health questions and health considerations, and that information is the type of information that you're going to need to protect, data you're going to need to secure, much like that you would protect health information and medical information under the ADA and HIPAA. Next slide, please. So when we get into the legal landscape, we have a large number of laws which may impact this. The Americans with Disabilities Act, which I've mentioned, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, applicable state and local non-discrimination laws. And in here, there are specific laws in some states which have specific requirements for reasonable accommodation for individuals who are pregnant and to take extra steps above and beyond what you would ordinarily do for an employee in connection with reasonably accommodating them in the workplace. National Labor Relations Act comes into play if you have a union or in the context of a group of employees who are resistant to vaccines, even in the non-union context. Then you'll have health and safety issues under OSHA and privacy issues under HIPAA and just general data privacy laws requirements protecting the privacy of the information of your employees. So these are all issues that are going to weigh on your decision and your policy once you implement it as to what you're going to require with respect to vaccines. Next slide, please. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, there's essentially two questions that come up in that the ADA protects qualified employees from discrimination on the basis of disability, which we'll discuss in a moment, requires reasonable accommodation to the extent feasible to permit the employee to perform the job. However, it also protects against the acquisition of disclosure of employee medical information absent some justifiable business need. That is, that the need must be job related and consistent with business necessity. Now, an employer cannot require a medical examination unless it's job related and consistent with business necessity. And a vaccine is not a medical examination under the ADA. However, the administration of the vaccine may require pre-vaccination questions that may constitute disability related inquiries or a medical inquiry or examination, which should be avoided absent business necessity. Those questions and concerns are raised on GINA as well, where personal or family health information may be disclosed. So if the employer is the one performing the vaccine or mandating it and bringing in a group to provide those vaccinations, ipso facto, that employer is requiring the disclosure of that information in connection with the vaccination effort. And then the employer would need to demonstrate that the requirement and the need for those questions is job related and consistent with business necessity. So it's a threshold you're going to need to show in this context that these questions need to be asked and the vaccine administered because there is no other real means to ensure a safe workplace without proceeding along those lines. Next slide, please. Another issue under the ADA and specifically pregnancy statutes is reasonable accommodation. And that is if an individual objects to taking a vaccine based on a disability that prohibits the employee from receiving the vaccine, the employer is then obligated to take steps to determine if there is a reasonable accommodation which will permit the employee to be able to do his job or her job without undue hardship on the employer. A similar obligation would arise in connection with pregnancy related issues if the individual pregnancy is such that there may be a risk factor uh, that contraindicates the individual receiving a vaccine. And as I said, some states, particularly the state where I am based in Maryland, have expanded legal protections for pregnant employees, and that would be a particular concern uh, in the context of administration of a vaccine program. So your question is going to be here: if an employee has raised one of these issues, is there an accommodation that permits them to do the job? Will that accommodation impose an undue hardship on the employer? That is an unreasonable cost. And is there a direct threat to the employee, the coworkers, or the general public if that employee is not vaccinated and is in the workforce? Okay. And direct threat is a somewhat different standard. And an employer would need to examine, we'll come to this in a minute, to determine whether that threat, that is a risk of serious harm or injury, is such that it cannot be eliminated by reasonable accommodation. Next slide, please. So before an employer takes action against an employee in the context of a vaccine requirement, um, the employer needs to understand that it can only exclude a worker from the workplace if they're unable to get vaccinated, if no reasonable accommodation is possible, or if having the worker on site presents a direct threat. Again, as I said, this requires that interactive process. You're not going to be able to automatically terminate the employee. There must be a good faith of exchange of information and ideas, determining the nature of the exemption from basis for the exemption from the vaccination requirement, where the person works, who they work for, what other types of accommodations may be available, whether it's in the use of specific types of PPE or protective equipment that doesn't quite qualify as PPE, but yet still provides a degree of safety and security. Is the individual in a remote work location, either on site or at home? These are all issues that need to be considered in the context of determining not only is there a reasonable accommodation, but is the person able to safely and fully perform the functions of the position without imposing an undue hardship on the employer or a direct threat of serious risk to themselves or others. Okay. So, if you look at the EEOC guidance, and there is an EEOC guidance on this in the form of Q&A, which is periodically updated. And if persons want it, that link to that, I can send it. It's easy to find by simply Googling EEOC vaccinations ADA guidance, and you'll come to a link on the EEOC website. It's quite lengthy, and as I said, it's updated on a regular basis. You should be looking at that as general guidance to understand these questions. And I'm going through the core points of these issues so that you at least get a flavor of the legal issues you're confronting. Next slide, please. So when you're looking at reasonable accommodation and undue burden, as I've said, you have to assess the facts relating to the employee's request for the accommodation, seek clarification as needed, give the employee their job description, give them a draft letter to the doctor if the doctor has provided a note explaining the basis for the exemption and it is unclear. Ask specific questions that relate directly to the job the employee performs and the potential reasonable accommodations that may be available. Engage in the interactive process with the employee based on that information. Review and balance the potential accommodations of the employee. There may be an alternate vaccine formulation. We now have two. There's, I think, a third one that is almost been approved for emergency use or has recently been. My brain blanks at the moment. But there will be more vaccines available as time goes on. Is additional protective gear effective? Is moving the work location, remote work effective? Temporary leave of absence, is that a possibility, particularly in the context of pregnancy? Or is reassignment a possible accommodation here? Assess that risk, the mitigation measures, the cost and effectiveness, and the impact on positions and others. At this point in time, we've gone through a year with various mitigation measures put into place. And as I have said previously, I think you're going to have difficulty uh, saying that there is no specific uh, process that you can implement that would make the workplace safe, and that the EEOC may take a hard look at the inability to accommodate or direct threat, and except in the most extreme of work environments. So I think these are questions that are going to be hard. They're highly fact specific. They don't have immediate and obvious answers. You need to do the homework with the employee and see legal counsel, obviously, if there is no clear resolution of the fact. Next slide, please. The next issue that comes up is religious accommodation. An employee may have a sincerely held religious belief or practice which prevents the employee from taking the vaccine. The undue hardship uh, examination here is lesser. It's one that imposes more than a de minimis cost on the employer as opposed to an undue burden, which is a high financial cost. I won't get into the reasons for that, but it is constitutional. Religion is very broadly defined and includes things outside of what would be your commonly understood mainstream religions, and has even included veganism, according to a Fourth Circuit opinion. And one of the core issues here is the sincerity of the belief that's held. Does the person act in a manner consistent with their professed belief? Have they previously refused to get a vaccine and are now are saying they believe in the flying spaghetti monster and told them that they're not to take a vaccine? Does the timing look suspicious? These are all issues that an employer would have a legitimate basis to look into um, to determine the sincerity of a religious request for accommodation. Next slide, please. Another issue that comes up is if you're not going to mandate the vaccine, or if you do mandate it and want, or if you do mandate it and request proof of vaccination, or don't and still want to have proof of vaccination, understand that the employers can require confirmation of the vaccination, but are strongly cautioned against questions which may elicit the disclosure of medical information. So the question should be, did you get the vaccine, yes or no? And if the employee wants to provide documentary evidence that they received the vaccine, they can do it. Be forewarned as an employer that when you receive that information, it's possible that that form could provide medical information, which you would then be obligated to maintain privately, and it could be a disclosure of medical information which you are now on notice about, with respect to a potential disability or genetic information. Next slide, please. There are also other legal issues that you're going to need to consider here, as I've mentioned. With the National Labor Relations Board, if you have a union in place, you may need to bargain with a union over the issue of vaccination policy. That would be determined based on what your contract language is and the extent to which the employer may set work rules. There may be group opposition to a vaccination plan. Two or more employees who are opposed to the vaccination and act in concert would be considered to be engaging in protected concerted activity under the National Labor Relations Act, even if there is no union on site. And taking action against those employees could be a violation of the law. Medical information is protected under various statutes, including the ADA and HIPAA. Some states have applicable data privacy laws. Security of information in general is protected under most state laws to some degree. An employer should have some type of information uh, security protection plan, a written plan of that nature to protect that data. So not only are you obligated to keep this information separate from the personnel files, but to maintain it in such a way that it is not disclosed in violation of the law. Emergency use authorization raises another question here. The consent form for emergency use, advises employees or individuals of their right to refuse vaccination. And one open question here is, how does this square with the employer's mandate? Would terminating an employee in this context constitute a wrongful discharge under state law? Can't answer that question. At this point in time, no one's raised it, but we lawyers overthink things sometimes, and this is a worry that a number of commenters have raised. And finally, there's compliance with safety standards even after vaccination. You're going to be obligated to comply with the OSHA and CDC standards even after a substantial component of your workforce and your residents have been vaccinated. Those obligations are going to remain. And there is nothing currently coming out of OSHA which in any way, shape, or forms mandates vaccinations as part of a workplace safety issue. There is a standard to maintain a safe workplace. However, OSHA has not interpreted that to require a vaccine. So, next slide, please. So that leaves us with the last issue, which is, what do you do uh, if if you don't want to mandate it, but you want to get employees to be vaccinated? Key issue here is informational vaccines. Concerns over safety and side effects are paramount here, and getting the information out to employees, showing them that it's safe and effective, and that the concerns they may have read on social media aren't meritorious. That's important to bring employees over to your side. Setting an example. I have seen examples with the CCRC where the chief executive officer of the organization made a buddy pact with another employee in the organization, and when she got her shot, he was there, and when he got his shot, she was right there next to him, well, 6 feet away, but close enough. uh, Both showing an example that they together were going to stand for the residents, the safety of the residents, and the safety of their team to get the vaccines. And boy, that photo was everywhere. So that's setting an example. Other things that have cropped up, and there's been a lot of articles about this recently, is employee incentives, paying cash, mobile clinics coming to provide them. Sometimes, if some employees are getting vaccines, they'll bring along other employees who are a little reluctant, but well, we'll go along with the group or we'll go with our friends and do it because they feel safer. Sick time for side effects, time off for getting the vaccine of a day or two in some cases, extra leave time for vaccinations. These are all incentives that employers have offered. There was an excellent article in the newspaper the other day from the Baltimore Sun that I saw discussing all of the various incentives. In actuality, a minority of employers are mandating vaccinations. Most are taking the approach, particularly in the context of the shortages that we have now of vaccines, to not mandate vaccines, and they're utilizing these incentives when the opportunity presents itself. And there is one final point I will raise here, and that's wellness plans. Um, and that is, there are EEOC rules that apply to wellness plans and incentives that they must be de minimis. How that applies to employee incentives for the vaccines is not clear. Many employers seem to say, well, it's important to us to do this and we'll take the consequences, whether it is or is not a wellness plan. So these are all things that you should consider in the context of your policy and how you approach vaccinations. So that's the end of my presentation. I can go to questions now. I hope that was informative.
Yes, it was. Thank you so much, Peter. We do have some questions coming in. Melissa?
Um, Actually, I think we only have one question that has come in, and that is, can we ask employees who don't, I think it's meant to say, who don't get the vaccine to double mask or wear an N95 to protect everyone now that we have other variants that are more contagious and deadlier?
Yes, I think that those are certainly permissible. They are certainly consistent with CDC guidelines, to my understanding, and would be consistent with reasonable protective measures in lieu of a vaccine in order to protect others in the work site from transmission of a variant of the virus. So I don't see anything that would necessarily prohibit that. To me, that would be a reasonable accommodation. Uh, Certainly, to say, look, if you're not going to get the vaccine, then we want you to double mask. You wear an N95, and you're going to follow social distancing guidelines and other strategies for disease remediation to avoid this coming into our work site.
And then a follow up that came in, Peter, or a different topic. Do cash incentives bump against ADA guidelines?
Well, they only they only bump against it in the context of a wellness plan in which, wellness plans have to be truly voluntary, because wellness plans are going to be asking for medical information to some extent. And in that context, the EEOC's final rules, which came out, said that if there is uh, an incentive in that case, in the context of a wellness plan, then it must be de minimis. Okay, it must be a de minimis incentive, and what is de minimis isn't clear. Is $100 de minimis? Well, the EEOC gives examples like a coffee mug or a water bottle. You can get a whole lot of those for $100. And eh, whether that language in the regulations that were issued ties an employer's hands with respect to these incentives isn't clear. Certainly, the the uh, health and safety aspect of it would seem to uh, be much stronger than saying, "Look, we want people to do the certain things to maintain a healthy lifestyle." That's one thing. That's typically what wellness plans are focused on. It's an entirely different thing to say, "We have vaccines available. We don't want to require it, but hell, we would like you to go and get it. And to do so, we'll give you $100, or we'll give you 4 days of extra paid leave, or something of that nature." So, you know, that's kind of an unanswered question. And from what I can see, um, in practice, that that a lot of the larger employers are saying, we're going to do it. Here's Royal Farms, $100. Lidl, a grocery store, which is actually a Dutch grocery company, in the U.S., $200 in extra pay, that they're going to give. Instacart giving $25 stipends to contractors who get it. So there is a great interest in doing that, and the question, the extent to which it is bumping against the ADA, is an open question.
Peter, when the vaccine has full FDA approval, not just emergency use, do you expect the guidance to change?
Um, I don't at this point. I do not expect that you're going to see guidance which mandates employers to provide the vaccination from a federal level. You may see, much in the way states approach influenza vaccinations and other required vaccinations, you may see a change in that from the state level, but I don't see that change coming from a federal level unless the efficacy is such that it prevents in I think, and you have case of Israel with well over 95% efficacy of preventing severe COVID. And the strains present a higher risk of infection and severe COVID, excuse me, that you may see it from a public safety standpoint, but I'm not entirely certain that that's going to come about.
There's a question in the chat. Can the provider require testing?
Testing is a medical examination, and the EEOC has indicated that an employer can require testing provided it is not antibody testing. Antibody testing is not allowed.
Okay, well, thank you, Peter. We really appreciate all that great information. I think we're going to move into our panel discussion now and hope you'll stay on to offer some feedback on the issues that are raised and the questions. So want to thank our panel today who are going to talk with us, provide an overview on the policy that they've chosen, and really hone in on some of the talking points that they're using with their residents who are placing pressure on them to mandate the vaccine. So I want to first begin with Jeannie Shiley, President and CEO of Shenandoah Valley Westminster Canterbury, and Michael Williams has also joined her. So over to you all. Thanks so much.
All right. Good morning, everyone. It is good to be with you. We are going to tag team this morning. Michael is our administrator at Westminster Canterbury and is really the person who has taken our daily lead on everything as it relates to COVID. So we are going to talk about our current practice as it relates to staff, and then I will answer some questions or go over what we're currently doing to address resident concerns. So at this point, I'm going to let Michael take over.
Good morning. We've kind of taken a three-pronged approach, probably many of the same approaches that you all did as well. We focused on educating our staff, going through the vaccination process, and then trying to celebrate all those that have gone through that. We started out by distributing lots and lots of factual information from the CDC, from the Department of Health, from the AMDA and other medical journals. We steered far and clear from any social media stuff. We took advantage of Dr. Jim Wright's LeadingAge Virginia presentation. We posted that out on our internal channel and other means so that staff and residents could take a view of that. Our own medical director did a live Q&A and also via Zoom for staff to get questions out there. We have a messenger package or messenger platform called One Day, and we've done information dissemination via that on a very consistent basis and are now doing almost daily employee testimonials out for those that have received the vaccine. Our leadership team has been doing small group or one-to-one discussions to try to get more information out to the staff. Many folks don't want to talk or will not talk in a larger setting, so we're trying to focus on the smaller numbers. Our medical director still has offered up one-to-one Q&A for any staff that have additional questions, and we've done some incentivizing with some additional PTO. The days of the vaccine itself, we've created a celebratory environment. We've had music going, we've had door prizes, balloons, just a fun environment aside from getting stuck in the arm, kind of a nice atmosphere, coupons for the ice cream. So that was well received. And then lastly, the continued celebration is we are doing social media promotions. Those that have received the vaccine, whether that was our CEO with a big thumbs up as she got her vaccine, all the way through residents and staff. Also, we're doing internal media publications, our resident newsletter, our staff newsletters, and other periodicals that promote the fact that the vaccine didn't cause a third arm or another eye to grow. So that's kind of the efforts that we have taken. So back to you, Jeannie.
All right. I want to talk for just a couple seconds or a minute about what we are doing to address resident concerns. And I know that we've all been getting the questions. So each week, administration has been meeting virtually with all of our residents using our internal channel. And usually we have a basic agenda, and then residents can email questions in that we read and then answer during this time. So, of course, honesty is always the best policy. Sometimes I think it gets us in trouble, but it is the best policy. So regardless, we share the results every week of our biweekly testing. Michael always shares how many residents and staff were tested, the number of positive or negative results. We also discuss the positivity rates in our area. Our community is unique. We are split between Winchester City and Frederick County. So there's always lots of conversation over which rate we should be using. We selected months ago to go with the CMS, and that is the number we use. So whenever the newspaper publishes a different rate, that's always fun. But anyway, a couple weeks ago, our director of HR, attended one of our virtual coffees and discussed, like Peter did earlier, a lot of the laws surrounding the vaccine. We talked at length about HIPAA because we had residents who were pretty sure that we would share anyone's name who was not vaccinated, and that is just not the case. We share weekly what we're doing to encourage staff. So the whole list that Michael just went over, we share that with residents so that they know what our efforts are as far as our staff. We also answer questions about COVID leave and pay. So we address those. And again, we have been very clear that the vaccinations are protected health information that we will not share. Of course, we're getting all kinds of questions and concerns about residents not wanting to allow unvaccinated staff into their living accommodations. The other week, we had a question from a resident that said, well, don't residents have the right to refuse staff who have not had the vaccine from entering into their apartment? And our response was basically yes. A resident has the right to refuse this service. However, we are not going to make special accommodations based on a resident's personal preference. Staff going into the apartments continue to wear masks, practice the distancing, and take all the necessary safety precautions, whether they've had the vaccine or not. And we have been pretty much stating this every week because we just cannot tie our hands operationally once we get to the point of, who's been vaccinated and who has not been vaccinated. So that is kind of a quick overview of how we're addressing resident and staff concerns. We'll be happy to answer questions at the end of the panel discussion if anyone has any. That's it, Dana. Thanks.
We seem to have lost Dana. So
we have lost Dana.
I'm sorry, I'm here. I was talking and I didn't realize I hadn't unmuted myself. I apologize. So in the interest of time, Greg, I was just going to ask, and the following panelist as well, if you could let us know if your policy is a mandate or voluntary, and then if you could just give us a little information about how you are responding to residents who are requesting it to be a mandate. So over to you, Greg, President and CEO of Williamsburg Landing.
Well, good morning, everyone. Our policy is not to mandate. In fact, we actually didn't even write a policy for this. We consulted our infection control procedures, and we do have a vaccination policy. We then did consult with the legal. Peter did a great job, so I won't even cover that. That's basically the conversation that we had. But what it came down to Williamsburg Landing was, what is the culture of our organization? And we made the decision that it's a choice. It's an individual choice. And as an organization, we should respect both residents and employees. We have a very diverse employee population, that we will respect their choice. And so we, early on, right from the get-go, once we made that decision, we were very transparent with our residents and with our staff and our board that we would not be mandating the vaccine for anyone. We then went on, like probably all of you, a very in-depth promotional campaign with videos and frequently asked questions, peer-to-peer, and so on. We do weekly calls, like Jeannie. We do weekly calls with all of our residents. I do those calls, and I do get a lot of questions. We have stuck to our message from the beginning. We will not make this mandated. Regardless of the pressure that we get from the residents, we're not going to change that. I think it has served us well so far. We've had our Pfizer vaccine. We've been through both doses. 59% of our employees have received the vaccination. Sure, as an organization, we would like it to be higher, but it is what it is. What we do in questions is basically what Jeannie said. We're not going to divulge any information. We're not going to alter services for you. It's a choice for you whether you want somebody to come into your home or not, or deliver that service. We've made it very clear to our employees, you are under no obligation if asked. We've asked our residents not to ask, but as you're probably aware, that doesn't happen very often. But we've made it very clear to our employees, you are not obligated to answer a question if you're asked whether you've been vaccinated or not. So at the end of the day, 98% of our independent living residents have been vaccinated, 94% of our assisted living residents, 100% of our memory support, 85% of our health center, and then, as I mentioned, 59% of our employees. Happy to take any questions in the chat room.
Well, thank you so much, Greg. What an interesting perspective and approach that you all have on it. Thank you. I'd like to move over to Heather Gearhart now, Vice President of Health and Wellness at Warm Hearth Village. So, Heather, is your policy a mandate or not?
Thank you, Dana. We do not mandate our staff to take the vaccine, but of course, we strongly encourage it. We are shooting to surpass the 70% compliance rate that's recommended for herd immunity. As of today's date, as a village, we have surpassed 65% with staff compliance in taking the vaccine. Though all in all, the resident response to our vaccine efforts has been positive, we've received some pushback from a few of our independent living residents, of course, where the vaccine, they want it to be mandated for all of our staff. Residents want to require proof of vaccination before allowing staff members into their homes. And that's not practical or possible, of course, given HIPAA limitations. So we have staff education through joint efforts of our education team and our marketing teams through weekly education efforts, and we've done everything from rewards, and we've even had an enormous blow up of the borrowed from a marathon runners group that we had at our second clinic that people went through that said you've reached the finish line when they got their second vaccine. It was wonderful. We've done weekly updates on our website, emails that are geared towards transparent communication. Just today, we clarified for ourselves that we're going to focus on continued efforts based on screening and not vaccination cards so that we can provide and place back the onus on individual choices as adults for our residents so that they can come to events and activities as we begin to open our village back up. And at the same time, we're trying to arm our staff with a statement on how to respond if they're asked if they have taken the vaccine so that they're not uncomfortable in that situation either.
Thank you, Heather. We actually had a question that just came in, and this could be for Peter. Could you is it legal or a breach of HIPAA for a company to identify on an employee's badge if they've received the vaccine? Thought it might be good.
Yeah, I think that's as clear an issue as if you're going to simply go up and ask the person, "Are you vaccinated or not?" Putting that badge on that signal on that individual is disclosing medical information about that individual. So I would have concerns about that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Heather, and thank you, Peter. So I'd like to move over to Robert Atkins, the administrator of the Masonic Homes. So Robert, what is the Masonic Homes policy?
Hey, Dana. So we did choose to make the vaccine a condition of employment, and we did not use the word mandatory throughout our early communications and really focus more on building confidence with the staff, the importance to be vaccinated. And we did reiterate that there were exemptions that were possible, but they needed to be legitimate in nature for medical or religious reasons. So one of the advantages that we have is that Because of the size of our community, we only have 182 staff. So we were able to sit down with individuals who had concerns and talk through them. And also, we paid some of the staff to leave during their shift to go see their doctors to discuss if they should be vaccinated, and also educated them on the importance of being vaccinated for themselves, our community, as well as for their family. So someone in the chat had asked about rates. We're at 92% of our active group of staff have been fully vaccinated. The remaining had medical exemptions. We haven't had any religious exemptions, and had a small group of people that are still on extended FMLA that couldn't come in to do it. So just to touch on a couple other things, our HR team did have some approved legal counsel letters that they sent to staff that a group said no without any reasoning why they weren't going to get it. We had a group that were seeking exemption from their doctor, and then those who wanted to wait for the second clinic to get their first dose. So we really tailored the letters to each scenario and gave them deadlines to get back to us with an answer. We also have it as our pre-screening employment recruitment process now to ask about vaccination for potential new employees. And then lastly, so in terms of residents placing pressure to mandate, that hasn't happened for us. We're fortunate that 100% of our residents are vaccinated, but they also heard the same consistent message that we were expecting staff to be vaccinated unless there was a legitimate exemption. So there was transparency throughout the process. They knew our intentions and have been very supportive throughout.
Well, thank you, Robert. I wanted to move over to Allison Zuba to give us sort of a perspective from Adult Day, and then we can move over to Melissa and address some of the questions that are coming in the chat box. So over to you, Allison.
Thank you, Dana, and hello, everyone. I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we do here at Adult Care Center. Our folks are here during the day and continue to live in their homes with their families. So we don't have quote unquote control of their environment outside of when they're here. Our staff have wanted to have the vaccine ever since we first started talking about it. So we are 100% vaccinated and are thrilled with that. We have 50% of our participants currently who have gone through the first round and are about to head into the second round. So our caregivers have been on board with it, and our staff have been on board with it. We have had a wonderful dream scenario here of how we've approached all that. And the discussions that we currently have among our board moving forward is how do we handle any new employees as well as admissions to our center. So we'll continue that conversation, and thank you so much for all the information from today. It's very helpful.
Thank you so much, Allison. Melissa?
Yeah, so Peter, a follow-up for you. If the badge is optional, is there still a HIPAA issue? Did we lose him, Dana?
Peter, you still with us?
Sorry, I didn't unmute.
That's okay.
Yeah, I had some things that I thought I had turned off that started to ding, and I didn't want everyone to hear that.
Thank you.
If the real issue is what is meant by optional? Is it truly optional? Is it truly voluntary? Who's giving it out, and in what circumstances? And that would be my concern. I mean, if the employee wants to wear a sticker that says I've been vaccinated, that's the employee's choice. If the employer is putting out badges that say, kiss me, I got the vaccine, that may be suggestive that the employer is encouraging employees to do it, and maybe it's not a violation of HIPAA if the employee picks it up and puts on the badge and gets a whole lot of kisses. But be that as it may, those circumstances are always gray areas and always matters of great heartache and indigestion to attorneys.
So I guess I would suggest members make sure that they have lengthy discussions with their legal counsel on such an issue, right?
Yeah, and think about it. If you've got employees, let's say 50% of your employees are wearing these vaccination buttons, and the other 50 aren't, your resident's going to start asking, why don't you have a button with that on
Mhm.
there?
Mhm.
And you're just inviting those questions um, that are going to make things probably more difficult, not just for yourself, but for the employees. And that's when you start going down the road where, is this really the type of controversy that we want to stir up? Are there other ways to address these concerns?
And then
Everybody, X percentage of our staff has gotten the vaccine. Everybody's still following safety precautions and guidance from the CDC with mask wearing, gloves, and protective equipment, et cetera, where necessary. So we're doing everything we can to protect you.
An- Another question, Peter, that came in: if we mandate the vaccine and employees have a serious negative reaction, is the company liable?
Um, there was a decision out of it going to likely be a workers' comp issue. And I recall there was a workers' comp case in DC which found that if you mandate it and there is a reaction to the vaccine, that yes, it's covered under workers' comp. I would not be surprised if that doesn't hold across the board. I don't think you're going to be, civilly liable from the standpoint of a tortious claim. That is, that you somehow engaged in conduct which takes you outside of the workers' comp laws and engaged in intentional conduct intended to cause harm to the employee, which is what you would need to show to go outside of workers' comp. But there has been a decision, to my knowledge, at least in the District of Columbia, which says that's probably a workers' comp injury, and you may have a compensation issue there. Um, However, that's it's a relatively small possibility given the number of doses that we've seen and the overall rate of truly severe reactions to it.
Great, thank you. So this next question, either Jeannie, Greg, or Heather, what has been the most common reasons that staff have declined the vaccination?
Yeah, that's clear.
This is Jeannie and Michael. I mean, I guess the uncertainty is what we're hearing. A lot of the staff are just taking a wait and see approach to see, how other staff and residents reacted to the first and second dose. So really just the uncertainty has been the main factor here as far as staff concerned.
Greg or Heather, are you hearing anything different?
This is Greg. No, not anything really different. Some few religious reasons, but pretty much the same across the board.
Yeah, I'm here. I spoke to a member this morning that still, particularly for his young female staff, it's the myth around infertility has been, the big reason that they have not wanted to get vaccinated. So that is still out there.
This is Heather. Same here. We have a lot of Virginia Tech students that are CNAs in LPN school or PT school that go to Radford University, and we're hearing a lot of that same myth rumor.
Mm-hmm. Yep. A follow-up question for any of you: have you required staff to sign a consent or declination form for the vaccine?
This is Robert. So anybody that declined, we did have them sign a form, but of course, for us, it was just for medical reasons. So we attached their note from their doctor to that, and that's kept in their HR file.
Robert, there's another question that came in for you, which was, how are you managing getting new staff vaccines? What's the time frame, and are you providing them?
That's a good question. So during the interview process, we let them know that we don't have the ability to give them the vaccine now, but if they're willing and able to, we'll do that as soon as possible. We are going to work with our local pharmacy when the phase 2 rollout happens, and they're going to come on site to provide the vaccine in the future. So any new residents and any new staff that come, we're going to schedule them to be there to be vaccinated as soon as possible when it's available. I don't
And
mind answering Jeannie's
Yeah.
question too, if
That's
you
what I
want
was
me
gonna
to
ask.
touch on that.
Yeah, please.
I'll be very honest with you that we did have employees resign as a result. Now we had 9 PRN staff and 2 full-time staff, and one of those full-time staff was actually getting ready to retire, and she decided to do it a little bit sooner. And then a lot of those PRN staff were in nursing that work very few shifts each month. So the impact was low for us, certainly unfortunate. But yes, we did have some people resign as a result.
Thank you for that.
And I was trying to see if there was another question. No, I think that everything else has been answered from me.
They have all been asked and answered, Dana. So nothing else in the chat box right now.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask Peter, based on all of the information that he heard from communities on how they're handling these issues, if he had any response, or guidance, or are we doing the right things? Are there things that we should change? Just wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I actually found it great. One thing, Greg went through a number of informational steps that they went through, which I thought was really impressive. That really shows how to get the message out there. I think, I don't know who mentioned it afterwards, but the about the young GNAs and CNAs who are concerned about infertility myths and things like that. It's important to get that information out there because there's so much garbage on social media. It just drowns out the truth. And I thought, I think Greg listened probably about 5 or 6 things that they were doing, if not more, that really showed a commitment, to get that information out to everybody with a significant uh, number of employees getting vaccinated, even if it's not as high as their goal. It might ultimately get there. And then on kind of the flip side of that, with the mandates, Robert's summary of the steps they took, where they made clear the exemptions to employees. We're gonna require it, but these are the exemptions that are out there. Needs to be legitimate. Putting out the seriousness of it. Don't come to us with Bill Gates is putting a chip in my head. But really, if you legitimately have concerns from a medical standpoint or religious standpoint, we'll listen to those. We're open to it. When there is a concern, you have the written letters. I thought that was, that's really thorough. That's thinking through your plan as to what you're going to do, each step of it, and how you're going to address it. So to me, both of those approaches that kind of mirror image of each other as to a mandate versus not mandate, and what you're going to do that's going to be effective to get your staff vaccinated. Even though there were some resignations, it doesn't sound like they were significant. But they got the results that each side was looking for, even if not 100%. In either case, some employees resigned, some employees didn't get vaccinated. But that is, and what I tried to sort of present was, here are the legal options and requirements that you have. You've got to build your strategy around those and understand how they work in conjunction with what your ultimate goal is going to be. Both of them did that in very different ways, and I thought the examples were great.
And there's
Well,
a follow-up question that came in, Peter, about that documenting the vaccine status in HR. Is there any reason not to do that from a HIPAA perspective?
I would maintain. I think it's worth maintaining that documentation or information, but I think it should be treated as ADA protected medical information or HIPAA, protected personal and medical information, and maintained separately from your basic personnel file, which has rates of pay, promotion, performance evaluations, etc. You'll have another HR file which is dedicated to medical information, which is more limited in its disclosure, who has access to it, etc. So I think you should maintain that information. It's something that's going to be necessary to know at some point in time.
Great, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. It looks like we're right here at noon, and I want to thank all of our panelists and Peter for being on today. We have contact information here if anyone would like to follow up with Peter at Whiteford Taylor Preston, his email address. Just going to check the chat box one more time just to make sure nothing else has come in. No? We are tentative on our call for next week, depending on what our members are needing. So we will keep you posted about that. If there's an issue that you think we need to flesh out like we did today, please let me know, and we can make that a topic for an upcoming call. So we are tentative for next week, depending on what you all need, but we will let you know. So thank you again for being on today. Hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day and their
And
week.
yes,
But
we'll send the slides, right, Dana? Robert's asking if we're going to send the slides.
they were in our update yesterday, and I can send those out again today. But they are in there if anyone would like to access them from yesterday's weekly update. Okay. Thank you, everyone. We'll talk with you soon. Let us know how we can help you. We're always here if you have any questions or concerns.